Hello everyone, good evening. Welcome to this amazing lesson. In my previous lesson, we have talked about primary sources, and this second lesson we shall talk about secondary sources. So for now, I beg for your attention and maybe lend me your ears, and then you listen to the definition and then the elaboration on secondary sources. Without wasting a lot of time, let me dive into some small notes on secondary sources. On this very note, I'll be narrating for you guys a definition of secondary sources, and maybe we shall get to know some of the ethics or the characteristics of secondary sources. So basically, secondary sources actually interprets or it do some kind of analyzation or synthesis or evaluation of primary sources. So what has already taken place, like in primary sources, secondary sources add some bit of understanding or some bit of uh, like likeliness, so that it is sound like in a very good format. So in other words, secondary sources analyzes and summarize what has already taken place in primary sources. And the next thing we shall have is we shall look about the characteristic of the secondary sources. So the first characteristic is interpretative. So secondary sources, it's interpretative in nature. Reason being, uh, it actually interpret what has already taken place in primary sources. So for it just analyze and then maybe take some deep look of it, then bring the exact meaning of what has taken place. And the second one is evaluative. Yeah, it evaluate, it weighs, and it evaluate what has already taken place in the primary one sources, and then at the same time it also summarize what has taken place. So it analyze, interpret, then evaluate, then it do what it is summarize at the same time. Then it's also contextual. Contextual is like it help it write the context of what has happened in the primary sources. So pertaining secondary sources, it provide the necessary context for primary data. So the contextual nature of this secondary source is like it bring out what has already taken place in the primary one, primary sources. Then we have example of secondary sources. So the first one is books. So books basically like historical books, books discussing causes of World War II. So books discussing causes of maybe World War One. So example, the first one is books. Then the second one is journal articles. These articles basically just analyze primary data. Take for instance, research papers analyzing the results of scientific experiments. So it's some kind of investigation that has been done previously, maybe to investigate on something. So and it include like event document. So documentaries also are example of secondary sources, because document actually they are written basing on facts, and they are written basing on what has happened way back or maybe what has happened previously. So like personal information is got from primary sources, then maybe analyzed by secondary sources. Then we have what encyclopedia. Encyclopedia basically means encyclopedias, like it's like a entry that summarize well established knowledge or event based on secondary research work. For instance, Britannica or Wikipedia. So those are the example of encyclopedia. Then the last one is essay and reviews. Essay and review critically criti- critical essay that provide analysis of retreat, like analysis of historical event, often building upon primary text. Then the last one we have movie or books review that interpret the context of the work. So basically, those are the example of secondary sources. And then we have purpose of secondary sources. The first purpose is like contextualization. So contextualization is basically the summary of what? The summary of primary data. So it provide the necessary context. The word contextualization came from the word context. So they summarize information to offer wider understanding of a particular event or ideas. So basically, contextualization is all about analyzing what has already taken place in primary what sources, and then the second purpose is interpretation and analysis. So interpretation and analysis help like researchers make sense of primary material by providing expert comment commentary or comparative analysis. So they in this kind of thing they just make analysis and then some kind of comparisons. Like they go to the field, they collect a lot of information, then they do comparisons, then they see which information is better to be delivered to the audience. So that is all about interpretation and analysis. So they sit down, they do some analysis, they do some interpretation, then they come up with a better one, a better resolution. Then the last one we have broader understanding. It analyzes then provide like a lot of meaning to guarantee broader understanding to the audience. Then on the conclusion bit of it, we have secondary sources interpret and analyze the primary sources, offering a broader context and synthesis of the information. So basically, that is all about secondary sources. So in our next video, we shall discuss about citation. Thank you for listening and thank you for sparing your time. Please like, comment, and share with your friends.